Let's continue then our conversation with political analyst Sandile Swana, and also joining us now is Professor Siphamandla Zondi, Professor of Politics and International Relations at the University of Johannesburg. Gentlemen, thank you so much to you both. Mr. Swana, let's continue with you and get your take on exactly what we were talking about earlier on the statements made now by President Ramaphosa on the back of our discussion following the ANC's press briefing, saying that action needs to be taken following those statements, of course, by the Commissioner, KZN Commissioner of Police. I mean, what kind of action do you foresee the President to take? There are calls for an inquiry of sorts to be established now following those revelations by Commissioner Mkhwanazi.
Okay, there are steps that need to be taken. First of all, must take cognizance of the correct use of the institutions that we already have. As I mentioned before, SIU, then you have Parliament and its committees that must identify the matters that fall within their purview. Others must also look at issues of executive ethics and so on. And I think that the Public Service Commission must also look at the relationships amongst the generals and whether people are managing their job description and employment contracts and the whole work environment properly. Because, I mean, from other engagements, I've discovered that that they have that job across the state. But more importantly, from a perspective of the community and the voters in South Africa, this issue of abuse of power and failed prosecutions and the killing of police officers by other police officers and by gangsters, Kenya comes to mind here, the killing of whistleblowers and the political killings generally, this lawlessness, it has been going on for about 25 years now. Since the days of Celebi and so on. So there's somebody, in this case Ramaphosa and his team, need to find a permanent solution to this problem. It has been going on for far too long. So I don't want us to be squeezing the president for a chappies type solution. We must have a proper solution that we don't keep circling around the same mountain. You hear Mbalula saying that they thought things are well between Mkhunu and so on. I don't think that is an entirely honest presentation of the facts. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much for that, Mr. Swana. Prof, of course, the BRICS has wrapped up. Just on the issue of the success of the BRICS Leaders Summit, as President Ramaphosa put it, how do you view the sentiments shared by the President in light, of course, of the declaration that was adopted on the back of the US, again threatening to intensify its tariffs or punish those countries aligned with BRICS?
Oh yes, yeah, no. The BRICS, the success of the BRICS summit, the expanded BRICS summit, as it's called, should be measured on how it sought to achieve what it wanted to achieve. What it started to achieve is under the title "Strengthening Global South Cooperation for Inclusive Global Governance." Yeah. And the very critical decisions that were taken there that signal there is a clear intent and systematic intent to go towards that. The declaration on climate finance that makes possible for more equitable access to climate funds that assist countries that are poor in fighting climate situations, especially adaptation, is a very critical one. The second one is the one that relates to the governance of artificial intelligence, AI, and robotics, and all of that, in a manner that is human-centered and in a manner that supports sustainable development. I think that, for me, is absolutely critical, that they've agreed certain specific standards in relation to that. The third one is working out a very clear process towards the reform of national financial architecture, including the Bretton Woods institution, the IMF, and the World Bank, towards a more equitable allocation of shares making in these institutions, and a greater role for regional development, such as our development the development of Southern Africa, for example, the African Development Bank will all benefit from those decisions. So there's a very clear set of actions that must be taken over the next year at least in order to achieve a more equitable world and all of that. And of course, the side issue by Trump threatening countries that it's not new, he said it in the past.
Yeah. Professor, your line, unfortunately, is not so great. Let me see if I can just bring our viewers to that clip, in fact, where U.S. President Donald Trump actually spoke on the tariffs and how he would intensify those tariffs, particularly for some of those countries that are aligned to BRICS. Let's listen to that clip.
Trump on Truth Social warned that any country aligning itself with BRICS would be charged an additional 10% trade tariff and that there would be no exceptions to that policy. The BRICS group, which includes South Africa, India, Russia and China, is currently holding a leaders' summit in Brazil and seeks to prioritize and develop relations between the global south. Trump also posted that tariff letters and possibly deals would be delivered to countries starting on Monday. Sherman Bryceby's SABC News, New York.
Perhaps let me get your reaction to that particular report that we've just heard. Mr. Swana, if you're still with us, I want to just start with you and just the implications. We know, of course, that this has been ongoing since Trump resumed office in his second term earlier this year. But what does this mean for South Africa now in terms of these renewed calls for more tariffs, particularly when you consider that the timelines are quite tight? There's a deadline of Wednesday that's been given. I mean, how successful will South Africa be here in negotiating with the US, if at all?
Unfortunately, Unati, I don't think that the deadline, as President Ramaphosa said, the deadline is everything, because a certain amount of work takes a certain amount of time. You must remember that this tariff is not just, Trump says there's 10%, but actually you might find that there's 1,000 products that have got different tariffs. So to make sure you've gone through the whole list and negotiated different sectors, different products is not as easy as Trump makes it sound. So I don't think our people should be panicked about the deadline. We may not meet the deadline, and Trump will throw a tantrum and eventually maybe extend that date at the same time. The tactics of intimidation, I don't think there are practical implications of charges if you're buying things from the US and all that, or selling things to the US. There are practical implications. However, you cannot negotiate something that's going to stay with you for the next 3-4 years of the Trump administration, simply because you have pressure now for the next couple of weeks. The deal must be fair and equitable, regardless of how painful it takes to get to a deal that is fair and equitable. So the intimidation by Trump is real, and there will be pain, but we must take the pain and negotiate to the best of our ability.
And I want to just stay on that last point. Professor Zondi, I hope you can hear us now. I want to just pose this very same question to you. I mean, what do we make of this timeline of Wednesday? Okay, I do believe that Professor Zondi is not there at the moment with us, but of course that was Professor Siphamandla Zondi just commenting there in terms of the BRICS summit that just wrapped up. Prof, I do believe that you are back. Just in terms of the timeline that has been given of Wednesday for these tariffs, how likely will South Africa be successful in negotiating with the US? And what does this mean in terms of just fundamentally for South Africa and US relations, which continue to be strained even after the White House visit a few weeks ago and less than 5 months to the G20 leaders meeting? I mean, notwithstanding the fact that South Africa and the US need to work together, given the fact that they are in the troika when we speak about the G20.
Oh yes, yeah, no. It's we hear it's also just roughly about 60 countries that are in the same situation. They have not been able to conclude negotiations before the 9th of July. Remember, the United States is negotiating with a team And that same team must negotiate with about 150 countries at the same time. I think they had an ambitious target. They would not be able to negotiate with all of these parties in a 100-day period, complex the dynamics and all of those things. I mean, I think they were unwise in doing it. But now it's getting to the deadline, and they're going to have to deal with so many countries whose negotiations have not concluded, including South Africa. We shall have to wait and see what the United States government decides between today and tomorrow, and Wednesday, whether they will proceed with the actions, which means they will decide what tariffs they are going to impose, and the countries themselves will also decide how they retaliate. And then it has to deal with those countries. And there may be actually more than 60 of those countries in the end that they may have to engage in a trade war at the same time with the United States. My sense is that Trump does not want to be known to have failed in this particular case, and therefore he is a deal maker, and for him to have failed to do a deal is to fail. So he will have maybe to extend this time and allow negotiations to continue going forward. It is a pretty unfortunate thing, but it's a good lesson for many countries that it should never in future depend on the United States for anything. Never, because it gives it too much power over you, too much power to dictate, too much power to disrupt. But these are lessons you learn. That's why we must strengthen the relationship, like the president was doing now in Brazil, with Malaysia, with Indonesia, the more growing economies. The United States is itself not a growing economy. It was unwise not to have listened to the National Development Plan in 2012, when it asked us to diversify significantly our trade, so that our trade comes significantly from the global south more than from the global north. Because the global north could not be trusted, it's very unilateral, it can take unilateral decisions, and it's very domineering, and it wants to be hierarchical. Yeah. And we did not listen to that. We have not moved our trade. We have not expanded our trade, especially with Southeast Asia, with South Asia, with Central Asia, where there's huge growth, with Latin America, with the Caribbean, and even with West Asia or Middle East. We have not done so. Now it is time to do so that in future we are never dictated again by any single state, wherever they may be from.
Gentlemen, thank you to you both. I really do appreciate your time. Political analyst, Mr. Sandile Swana there, and also, of course, Professor Siphamandla Zondi, Professor of Politics and International Relations at the University of Johannesburg. Of course, interesting times for President Cyril Ramaphosa, both domestically and, of course, internationally.